So everyone, hi, good morning. And I'm so excited that you have a construction innovation day. I'm dialing in from Singapore, which is half a world away. But I think the world isn't so big anymore now that we are called to collaborate with one another. So there is a saying that all roads lead to Rome. So just as all roads lead to Rome, all communication and all collaboration should reach data at the center. So today we'll talk a little bit about smart cities and how data really leads to different decisions and different options. Now, one of the building blocks of our town planning in Singapore is borrowed heavily from Le Corbusier. So he was an architect really ahead of his time. And for those of you who are not architects and just maybe construction or engineering, it's good to pick up these books on architecture, and it's about city planning as well. Now, the principles about what he talked about was the radiant city. It needs to have a city needs to improve the quality of life for its people by providing access to light, sun, and sports, really recreation and work, and also some personal space, right? So it needs to have a good layout, really inspired by the human body. It needs to have architecture. It needs to have transportation and roads. And the goal of the Radiant City is really to provide a hierarchy of living, working, circulation, and care for the entire body and spirit, really holistic. Singapore borrowed from those concepts, and we wanted to build a new city from a clean slate. But you will see that even with that clean slate, we also had a history and a legacy of what our British colonial past gave us. So we had a goal really to create a city with adequate open space, transportation, and fresh air. So let's take you on that journey. But with Le Corbusier, you will also see that there was a whole council of Siam. So this Smart Cities Conference, unfortunately, we aren't the first ones to think about it. 1933, one century ago, so a whole lot of architects came together to work not just on standards for building and construction, but they really came together to also address climate crisis and standardization on a global scale with humans at the center. So we would like to think that we are in the new age, but smart cities the concept of it has been around for quite a while. So let me tell you the story of Singapore. So Singapore is this tiny island, and we started off in slumland. Really, it was disparate. It was houses built all over the place. But today we enjoy a good GDP. We are one of the most productive nations in our region, and we even have won some awards and some recognition as one of the world's richest nations. One of the founding fathers of modern Singapore is Lee Kuan Yew. He had a team with him, but he was really our founding father, the one who led the charge. And he used to say, visiting CEOs used to call on me before making investment decisions. I thought the best way to convince them was to ensure that the roads from the airport to their hotel and to my office in the city were neat and spruce, linked with shrubs and trees. When they drove into the Istana domain, which is where the government office is, they would see right into the heart of the city, a free oasis, 90 acres of immaculate rolling lawns and woodland, and nestled between them a 9-hole golf course. So without a word being said, they would know that Singaporeans were competent, disciplined, and reliable, and are people who would learn the skills required soon enough. So this is found in a book from Third World to First. If you do have a chance to pick it up, I hope you will learn some of the lessons that we have suffered along the way. So here is our story, and it begins with land. So when we're talking about smart cities, that's really where we should begin. about land and data around land. So Singapore is insignificantly small with no natural resources. And in 1819, somehow someone found us, and this was Raffles. And we were an active maritime route in the South China Sea. So we were really useful as a stopover port, so transshipment port. So we were a good trading hub and also a cultural hub. So that's where if you come to Singapore, you get a good feast and good food. So in 1819, a Singapore treaty was signed by Sir Stamford Raffles, Temenggong Abdul Rahman, and Sultan Hussein Shah of Johor. And Singapore was then established as a British colony. So that was the very next day, he left Singapore to carry on his business and left William Farquhar as commandant. By 1822, we had more people coming to Singapore because it was a new British colony. It was growing in fame, but it was starting to grow kind of chaotic and unwieldy. And we had a town planner at that time called an engineer. He was Singapore's first official engineer. And we only had 20 policemen. So there was a lot of crime. There were a lot of squatters. There were a lot of settlements, which were not planned. So this was really where we got our name, Sin City. From 1820s to 1850, then we moved on to, we continued on with really no proper land laws. And the land regulations were only introduced in 1830. So this was a good decade after founding. And we really didn't have a proper system to track land laws. So in 1847, this was even repealed. So it was discounted because someone said that the governor in council of the Strait Settlement had no jurisdiction to pass the regulations. And so that we were back to square one. So no parties could really register land. There was no way to collect rent and no way to collect tax revenue. So the government lost a lot of money because all parties could freely and privately exchange ownerships and subdivide land. In 1856, we still had lack of land survey accuracy until someone who was a collector of customs at Port Adelaide in South Australia introduced the Torrens system of title registration, which really followed ships registration. So in 1860s to the 1920s, we built in the basic infrastructure for telephone lines, for electrical power, built in our first two reservoirs, and also made a link from Singapore to our neighboring causeway to Johor, so that we could get better trade and also establish. The slum problem was still there. So this was almost a century after founding. So the Singapore Improvement Trust was then created to draw up a general improvement plan and to condemn insanitary buildings and to initiate improvement schemes and provide housing for the poor. So this was really an anti-poverty poverty alleviation scheme. But they were still not empowered to engage in large-scale construction of public housing because it was just meant to handle the slums and to handle the poverty crisis. However, there was also a little bit of back and forth between who could tear down buildings and who had jurisdiction. So this was even still not resolved until after the war. So after World War II, we then started having a new urgency to build and rebuild. So that land laws started to change so that we could provision for renewal. So we had a Commissioner of Lands for Strait Settlement who expressed his concern for the perpetuation of freehold titles. So freehold titles is where you hold on to the land parcel in perpetuity. This was not going to be good because if the government needed the land for town improvement, then they would have to pay it at market rates, which would bankrupt the government. So they decided to make sure that leases expire. So these are some of the laws that we continue on to today. Land leases expire after 99 years. In 1965, we had independence from Malaysia. We did not come to a good consensus with how Singapore was going to be run as part of Malaysia. So we were out. I think there will be videos online to see a very tearful Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I think it was devastating because we had hoped for a multicultural society, free from British rule, but really as part of a bigger nation. Unfortunately, we were left on our own with a GDP per capita of $500. This was one of the lowest in the world. Most of the island was covered in swampland, with 2/3 of the population continuing to struggle to survive in cramped slum settlements. So growing up, I could see neighborhoods around me catching fire and entire villages getting burned down. There was no farmland, no natural resources, no oil supply, no fresh water supply. And on one day in 1961, taps even ran dry. We had no clean water because the rivers were polluted. We had animal droppings in the river, and all the sewage and waste and garbage was also in the river. So this was a terrible time to be newly independent. So in 1967, we had a Land Acquisition Act for any public purpose. So the government interests will supersede and override individual interests. So until today, if you go to the Singapore news site, this is still being discussed. What belongs to the individual and what, when it becomes significant, what belongs to the government. So this is the Land Acquisition Act that is continually revised. So now that we've collected land and we've got a public register of land, we've got our survey systems done, and we've got new equipment done, what then do we start to do? So hopefully you learn from our mistakes. So this is Hotel New World. This was catastrophic. If you've seen the World Trade Center collapse after the 9/11 attacks, this was pretty much similar. Unfortunately, this was not a terrorist attack, but it was a structural engineering problem. It was built in 1969 to 1971. It was built as a hotel with just six levels above ground and a basement. Cracks had appeared a few years later, but were not addressed properly. There was a monoxide leak in 1975, and in 1986, the whole thing just collapsed. So what was the engineering flaw? We can only attribute it to calculations. So the structural engineer did not factor in self-weight or dead weight of the building. There was also poor construction and cheap materials, which was used in Singapore. And this was where perhaps we had a contractor which was trying to cut corners and really provide the cheapest available building. Another crisis happened in 2004. So that was for the buildings, right? So this is for infrastructure. And this is when our MRT lines, our mass rapid transit train system, we had been running it since 1988. So this was not supposed to be very new. So Nickel Highway is a huge arterial road that runs across a river, Singapore River, and it collapsed in the evening of the day while construction works were going on due to tunneling. So the land had been reclaimed 40 years beforehand, and there was like 3 to 5 meters worth of thick ridged sand placed on shallow seabed. So this had been done many, many, many years before, and everyone was really quite used to that kind of methodology. The only difference was that the design was slightly off. There were a couple of errors. There was not enough monitoring at the site, and there was incorrect use of the computer program. But still, we didn't know what really happened. But because the engineers had been doing it so many times from 18 to 20 meters, they didn't think too much about it. Unfortunately, this time the excavation went deep into 30 meters into soft clay, and it had not been carried out before. So now, from these two, Hotel New World collapse and Nickel Highway collapse, and these are the two most disastrous built environment collapses in Singapore, we then start to have a little bit more of building and construction training. So now we have Building Construction Academy. So again, this had a history from different iterations as Construction Industry Training Center, and then a Construction Industry Training Institute. And in 1999, it was merged. So this would be the equivalent of the Guatemala Construction Association that we're attending now. So in 2001, we had our first diploma program in construction engineering. And so this is how we are continuing to train professionals in the built environment in Singapore and in the region. And this is also where I lecture. So you can see that we made a lot of mistakes in the past, but we've also had our successes and we've learned from them. And one of the biggest successes to date is really Marina Bay. So if you've never come to Singapore, you should definitely come over to Marina Bay, where we have interesting architecture and architecture that's inspired by food. On the left, you have to try this fruit. It's called the durian, and you can see it's got multiple spikes, and it kind of inspired the esplanade by the bay. And you can see how some of the architecture resembles fruit as well. So after Marina Bay was built, the entire Bay Area was built. Really, 2015 was a good checkpoint on where we were 50 years after independence. And we were simultaneously a city and an independent state. We had achieved water self-sufficiency with 4 taps and 17 reservoirs, not just 2. We got our defense rights. We had a new urban core around the historical center connected by rail and road networks in a hub and spoke configuration. We had established 26 housing estates and eliminated all the slums, and some poverty is being managed using rental flats, but we've housed all 5.5 million people. So has the quality of life gone up? Definitely. So you can see that it even inspired the film Crazy Rich Asians. Not all of us are crazy rich, but I think we have a pretty good quality of life. So we also managed to pull all of that off, I think in part because we are a small country and we have a centralized government, a stable government. They have been in government and they've been running for 50 years, unbroken. They control local, city, province, and state all at the same time. So there isn't a need to go from municipal to a federal authority. It's basically the same authority. The law for the Land Acquisition Act really has also brought up home ownership in Singapore. So about 80% of Singaporeans own their own home. This is definitely a much better situation to be in than having lived in slums and cardboard boxes and wooden huts. So the next phase of our journey would have to look at pro-market policies and to attract private investment. So really, this was a good checkpoint on whether we could survive even beyond 2015 when we had that kind of checkpoint. So we've got another famous politician, Kishore Mahbubani, and he wrote in his book, Can Singapore Survive? Our next challenge is a really cramped space. So according to the World Bank, the average floor area per person is only 323 square feet. I think it's even less now, compared with 960 in Australia, 832 in the US, and 370 in Japan. So I think we are starting to feel the squeeze, but I'm sure we can do a little bit more about it. So this was our journey again. After our 50 years, we started to have a look every 3 years, what do we need to do? So you can see we started this whole of government initiative called Smart Nation. This was run by the Smart Nation Program Office. And this was a government agency which also connected and linked to different other government agencies to really transform Singapore through technology. So this was also when a government body called GovTech was formed. And GovTech really starts to look at technology enablement through parking, through sensors, through phone apps, and also to have a data backend and a spine for all the other government agencies in Singapore. So this is where Smart Nation together came along. And other initiatives that happened were Virtual Singapore. So Virtual Singapore is where the built environment industry really came together to see what was possible to counter some of the challenges of the day, like the urban heat island effect, to counter noise, and to also get a good feel of our entire city in 3D. So this was before Google Maps had 3D. So we were really trying to push it to its limits. So this was also where the GovTech guys, also created Punggol Digital District. So if you come to Singapore, Punggol Digital District is in the in the northeast of Singapore, and it will be really the technology, and it will be the eco center of the commercial enterprises of the north of Singapore. So again, following the hub and spoke of road and transport networks, we will have CBD in the south, where the historical city center is, and then now we've got the Punggol Digital District in the northeast, and then we have Jurong. We have a megaport that's being built. Phase 2 is out, and that is really for our transshipment and for all our shipping and logistics folks. That's in the west, and we have Changi Airport, which is the airport hub in the east. So that's a pretty good overview of where things are in Singapore as well. Also, we have Jurong Innovation District. This is where the new government hub is. Really, all the government centers are in Jurong Innovation District, and that's where some of the first few centers for Singapore were put in Jurong Lake District and Jurong Innovation District. Then, of course, we cannot get away with smart cities without talking about our amazing Marina Bay District. So you might see just buildings on top, but what you will not see is that it's completely built on reclaimed land. All that it's built on did not exist 50 years ago, and it was built really by reclaiming our rubbish, burning our rubbish, dumping it into the land, and just compacting it and waiting for it to be ready. There's a whole lot of things going on in Marina Bay District, and I would just like to highlight maybe one of the most interesting things is the cooling solutions. So you will see the district cooling service is actually a huge underground corridor below Marina Bay District, where all the buildings are connected to it, and a centralized air conditioning system runs through so that it cools the entire district, because that's where offices and the commercial enterprises are, and people want to feel cool. There's also a digital government blueprint to really set the tone and to really tell all the government agencies and private enterprise what is to come. So the digital government really is digital to core, and really serves with heart. So you can see some of the core concepts around it, really about citizens at the heart, and businesses. So we are really trying to be pro market and pro business. Who does it serve? It also serves the public officers as well. Okay. So part of this whole Smart Nation thing was to turn on the Smart Nation sensor platform. So this is a Smart Nation sensor platform where even the children who are 10 years old are taught how to connect to the Smart Nation sensor platform, through like competitions and through work exposure and school exposure. So in 2018, we then had whole of government. We have a smart nation. How are we going to build a smart nation? Then we realized not everyone is smart in the right skill set. So here starts the retraining exercise. So we have skills future and everyone goes back to school. And one of the biggest problems is that the founding engineers and the founding workers who built Singapore were now getting old. So we were going to have a new generation of young people with very little experience. And we had the older folks with all the experience not being able to go on the ground. So there was going to be, what was needed was a transfer of information. Okay. So with new skills, new paths are also being formed, new relationships are also being formed. And then we realized that we needed to address UN SDGs. So we had COP21, so we had whole of government green plan. So you can see the pattern every 3 years, right? So now we have the SG Green Plan, really talking about sustainability and really at the Committee of Supply. So it was really to continue our legacy and our reputation as a city in nature with greenery all around, access to parks. We should have access to parks every 5 meters, 5 minutes. We should also be able to walk to an MRT station, which is a train station, and we should have enough public transport so that less cars will be on the road. So this was really to try and address everything around energy as well and sustainable living. So you would see that Punggol and some of the newer cities like Tengah really have sustainable living built in so that everyone is really has close access to public transport. And a lot of things are walkable. The considerations for electric vehicles also started to come in. The cycling path network was also expanded, and we should have a full circle very soon around Singapore. We also have, this really lays out the entire green plan until 2030. Okay, so in 2024, then we realized that this year, this was the real launch of government Build SG, which was going to be the startup ecosystem and really our future. So this was a launch, sort of soft launch a few years ago, but really pushed forward this year. So Singapore startup ecosystem is pretty rich now, right? So we have a lot of tech startups. For example, 4,000 tech startups in 2017. I haven't got the latest data for this slide, unfortunately, but this is from AVC, AVCJ and PitchBook. And we've had many deals with all the venture capitalists, incubators, and accelerators all in Singapore. So there are also deep tech domains, and the real push is for Singapore to be a living lab. We are small, we are efficient, and we can start to test bed things like for health and biomedical sciences, for advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, engineering, high performance computing, quantum capabilities, infocom and media, social media, censorship, streaming, and AI, right? And also for clean tech and how we use energy more sustainably. So global startups and enablers can benefit from Singapore's vibrant ecosystem. So we welcome you to come over to learn. I know some of you have managed to come and have the opportunity to really experience Singapore, but we would like to learn from you guys too, right? We have a whole bunch of government policies, accelerators, investors, infrastructures, loans, and talents, and really innovation hubs in Singapore. So what's needed for smart city, really citizens and communication. So we want to think about the near term. So this is how we get sensor data and how we can link them up into your construction dashboard to really try and find out where your sensors are and really try and understand how to use that data. Data interop as well is good for finding out what the needs of your users are. So if your citizens are going to require, for example, life skills, how do we then address those life skills? CAD, BIM, and GIS are also very core to what's next, what's coming next, which would be simulation. So in the background, you will see a project done by MX3D and Imperial College. This is really a structure of a bridge, a 3D printed bridge. And this is a simulation that has been done on a 3D printed bridge to see how it would react when different forces are applied to it. AI also comes on for learning and simulation. So this is again what's needed. Singapore is very active in artificial intelligence, and we are also now looking at ethics and governance in AI. So that's part of ESG. Environment as well. So we unfortunately are sitting on a plate which is sinking. So not only is climate change upon us, the land is sinking as well. This simple geography of plate tectonics. So how do we now continue to monitor what our basic needs are and not have our homes get flooded out? How do we manage safety, social, and all the way up to quality of life with self-actualization? Then obviously it's back to innovation as well. So how do we then do long-term planning? We need the capital. We need to be part of the environment systems, and we need each other. Okay, so what does a smart city need? It really needs, so this is a Mercer study based on quality of living. So you can see in 2015, we were ranked at 26. In 2023, we are ranked at 29. But things haven't changed, but we are still the top Asian city for smart cities. Okay. These are some of the indicators that you might want to think about considering smart cities. So if you want to take a picture of this, by all means, because there's ISO standards, ETSI, ITU, and also the UN SDG. But there's always a balance. You can have all the indicators you want, but how profitable are you going to be? So you also want to think about prosperity. So where's that balance? Only you guys know what kind of sustainability, what kind of people metrics that you want to achieve. So have a look at these standards. I think they are going to be a bit more prevalent in the coming years so that we can do business with one another. And these are just some pictures of the digital twin that I've created. So these are parts of Singapore. And really, I have the whole of Singapore on my laptop, which is quite amazing. This was not possible years ago, but really to be able to create a digital twin of your city or your town may not look exactly like what it is, but you want to start to do some studies, simulation. So all this is possible with CAD, GIS, and BIM. And really some creative modeling. Some of these models are done by students. Some of them are in the open domain. So you can see some of the credits down there. But really, we want to see managed traffic. We want to see what it looks like and really have a good view of the city. Okay, so things like where do you drive? Is there going to be a traffic jam? What does your new house look like? And what does the whole town plan look like? So this was one note that was designed by Zaha Hadid. So we can also look into construction, what are the temporary works, piping, solar studies, and we also want to do the simulation for different analyses like fire simulation. How does the sprinkler affect the load? How does smoke transfer throughout the city, how the solar analysis heat up certain areas of the building and have some parts of the building hot and some parts of the building cool, how does wind flow through the entire building. So this is simulation is possible only if you have the model. And the model needs to be smart and intelligent, and this is where BIM really, really comes in. So not only do you have BIM for buildings, we can also simulate, for example, what happens if you install a new car park in a new shopping center and it's Christmas time and everybody wants to go. Is that going to cause a new traffic jam in the area? So we've done a couple of studies on this. What about drainage? When there's a huge 100-year flood, does your drainage handle the entire system, or is it going to overflow? So drainage systems can also be planned. But before some of these things happen, you might also want to do some reality capture. So this is an example of point clouds. And this is a project that I did in Thailand to really see to really see how we can capture even on hillsides. And I will just zoom past it. So there's a whole bunch of drones. So this was a project that we did with a university in Chiang Mai. Yeah, so that was me somewhere. Okay, never mind. Yeah, so and then we recreated the whole thing to see what it looked like to recreate and reverse engineer the entire model. Okay. So with that, we could see and drive through the roads to really show it to the government, right? And then we could also then build out the entire traffic network in the whole of Chiang Mai, and that's Old Town in the middle. Okay. So really, we want smart city and digital models so that we can prepare for the future, for pandemic and innovation. This is an example of how we can simulate airflow, not only in systems, but also, for example, at the operating theater. This is another example that I did with the tsunami. Banda Aceh was completely wiped out, and we helped to rebuild it. We rebuilt it 2 years ahead of schedule. And really, this was coming just from satellite data and building it all out, right? So Singapore also has incoming risks. We have now suddenly ancient fault lines that have reactivated, and then the lightning that strikes Singapore is also starting to reverberate in the ground. So we have new challenges that we constantly need to address. So we always need options, and all roads lead to options. So where does Guatemala's road take you to? So thank you very much. I hope this has been useful information for you. Our journey as a small little country, maybe some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the mistakes that we have made as well. We hope that you have learned from it, and feel free to reach out to me. Right, so I do trainings, I do lectures, and there's a whole bunch of us of this the ASEAN Smart Cities Network, and some of the software that I use is from my partner Autodesk. Thank you very much.